Bhavna ma'am, we are all set? Ishita ma'am, all set?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, yes. I'll just find out if sir is there. 1 second. Bhavna ma'am, Ishita ma'am, a very strange thing has happened. The platform is full, so sir cannot join now unless some people leave. So I know it's a very strange occurrence. He just got pushed out when we let everyone in due to the traffic. Unfortunately, sir got pushed out.
Oh God.
And now he's unable to come in because we are at 500.
Yes.
So I suggest you start. I'm going to keep making an attempt to take him in. The minute he's in, I'll let you know. Aap please chalu kariye apna workshop. Yeah,
And
thank you.
Ishita ma'am needs to be unmuted.
Unmuted?
So yes, I've unmuted her. So
Great.
Ishita ma'am.
Thank you.
You are all co-hosts, right? So you have all got equal rights now. Great.
Yes.
Please continue. Please continue.
Okay. So once again, a very warm good afternoon to everyone. And on behalf of Team Quadrac, this is indeed a pleasure to be on air again for the USF set of schools on competency-based education. Neelam ma'am, Kedia sir, thank you very much to give us this opportunity. Many of you may be here from the last time as well, and I can guarantee you that while some of the slides will be common, you will find a lot of new learning in this one. So I can see in the chat window, many of you are wondering whether this is for secondary or whether it is for pre-primary, whether it's for primary. So last Saturday, we had our session for the middle school and secondary, and today's session has been customized specifically for the classes and years that are for the foundational and preparatory years. So without any more delay, let me start my PPT and we'll get on board with competency-based education. Right. I hope you can all see my screen now. You can just give me a yes, ma'am, in the chat window. I can follow you.
Yes,
and yes, this is going to be very interactive. So let me give you a little brief of how this particular session is going to go. I have with me my colleague, Bhavna ma'am, who's going to be adminning the whole session. So she's going to make sure that we don't have unruly pop-ups. I'm going to hide this for the last time. I hope it doesn't come up again. So we have these black strips that come up. I hope that's going to be monitored. And yes, I also have with me our colleague, Kritika Mansingh ma'am, who will be joining us from far away, but she's totally into this program and she's going to be taking part of this session as well. So I'm going to start the session. We're going to have a lot of interaction with me. You're going to be seeing very relevant videos, and there will be times when we're going to ask you to type something into the text box in your chat box, or if you're on YouTube.
Ishita ma'am, sorry for disturbance.
Yeah.
Kedia had just come.
Kedia sir, okay, sure. Yeah. So let me stop the share. And we'll be able to see Kedia sir. Yeah.
Can you see me now?
So where are you, sir?
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Good afternoon to all our young India, all young teachers. And we are once again welcome Bhavna, Tandon, Ishita, and Kritika, the educators, for making us to learn something new today, right? So all the teachers, please be attentive and try to learn something from these gifted educators, right? So I will not waste your time. I hand over to Bhavna Tandon or Ishita to carry forward. So 1 minute learning loss should not be there due to on my account. So carry on.
Thank you very much, sir. But on the same note, 1 minute less of guidance can be very very, very expensive for us. So your kind words always.
Okay.
So I'll go back to sharing my screen.
Chalo, thank you very much.
Right. So this is what today's session is all about. I think this has frozen because I'll just go back to sharing. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So moving on, let's start with a reality check.
The world we live in is changing fast. Every day, we are becoming more globally connected, developing technologies and systems, and dealing with new opportunities and challenges. The world today looks very different to 20 years ago, and it is constantly evolving. Change, complexity, and uncertainty are a normal part of life. From the way we communicate, to the types of jobs we have, to the way we think about our identities and societies.
Yes, that was true. Right. So let's begin with asking what is happening in schools today. Why is it that there is suddenly this emergent sort of a crisis about how school education has been happening and why everyone is talking about new methodologies? The reality is that today in schools, especially in India, we are harping more on making children learn a whole lot of content through memory, through rote memorization, mugging it up, cramming it up, and then just bringing it out into a timed exam where it is absolute right or wrong with no levels of degrees of actually learning. And that has shifted the focus onto marks. Now, while this may be happening, it is happening. We all know it's happening to our own children because that is how higher education entry levels are. They are looking at marks. But what has happened in the long run, if we say education is preparing our youth for tomorrow into the careers, professions, and life that they're going to lead, unfortunately, this is what has happened. It has created a pool of so-called qualified youth ready for the world, but they have no life skills, they have no people skills, they have no interpersonal skills, and that has become a big problem. The only thing they are very good at is taking tests. Another reality check is, and this is a newspaper item that has come out just last week, or rather 20th of September, which talks about how parents are now actually thinking that they have to look at schools that are going to focus on how to study rather than how to score. I know these schools may be a little expensive, but fee is not an issue because the focus they are looking at is concept-based learning. Concept-based learning with deeper, long-term, real-world understanding and a competitive edge to students. And this means we need to really look at education as it is today in our classrooms. What is our role as educators? Let's look at it.
As grown-ups, we have a big job to do. We're responsible for helping children learn, grow, and become successful people, for helping every child enter adulthood ready to be critical thinkers, effective communicators, team players, and independent problem solvers, and for making sure they're academically prepared for each new challenge, both in the classroom and in daily life. Because with the right knowledge and skills, they'll be ready for college and careers.
Right? So that is our role as educators. We have a huge burden on our shoulders. Only if it is properly planned and executed will we be able to absolutely meet what is there. So these are some things that worry us. When we enter the classroom,
I love
we
my
look
job
at kids.
so much, but I constantly worry about whether I am doing enough to prepare my young learners for the future. They are exposed to so much information every day. They are able to interact with knowledge and people from all around the world through the internet. How can I teach them to navigate this world successfully? I've even heard that most jobs in the future will be jobs that don't even exist right now. How do I prepare my learners for this? I believe that it is more important than ever to equip young learners with excellent literacy skills. I know this is important because if my learners can listen, speak, read, and write with fluency, understanding, and confidence, this gives them the foundational skills to learn anything. I am also sure that it is still important to equip my learners with mathematics skills and knowledge. And I think it is good for young children to learn some content knowledge about their world.
So this is what we know about is what is going to be coming into foundational literacy and numeracy, which is called FLN, which has taken a very, very big part of what NEP is. And they are going to be testing this at the end of grade 3. So literacy, numeracy, and general knowledge is going to be a very, very crucial aspect of foundational and preparatory years. And you teachers are the ones who are going to be handling those children. So when we look at competency-based education and why the world is moving towards it, by the way, competency-based education is not a new term for India. If you look at this chart, you will see that we have been talking about it since 2011, which is so many years ago. There was a definition given at that time. It was revised in 2019, just a year before NEP came up. And then finally, NEP gave it shape. Why? Because we realized that in the international scenario, which has already moved into competency-based education decades ago, these are the plus points where our children are missing out. They have talked about development of competencies and not development of content and knowledge. They have talked about an emphasis on competency-based learning and not learning by where my gaps are there and I'm just automatically moving through the trajectory of getting promoted to the next class. They are talking about competencies being assessed in light of not quantitative, but qualitative and level-wise child-centric methods of assessment strategies. And they are talking about building a global citizen out of these children by building a holistic individual with all the competencies in place, right? So this is why NEP also talks about it. And you can take a reference of the para number if you would like to read about it in the NEP manual. It's right there for you. So basically, in short, each para is focusing on how the curriculum and pedagogy has to be completely reformed from pre-K right up till grade 12. Real understanding and learning how to learn should be the focus area, and it should develop the whole individual, right? The second para is talking about how we have to shift from rote memorization to competency-based learning, from short-term, what I know and marks, to lifelong, what I can do. That is the shift. And conceptual clarity, moving from lower order thinking and learning skills to higher order thinking and learning skills. The last paragraph, of course, talks about how assessments should be as learning and for learning and not as learning, not like at the end of a topic, end of a class, end of a chapter kind, but while the process of learning is happening, then it should be assessed so that we identify those midway gaps and plug those gaps before the child moves ahead. Of course, it would also mean that we have to look at our teaching learning practices and revamp them so that we fit into competency-based strategies rather than the traditional approach. It has to be optimized and equitable. When we talk about equity, we are talking about how we need to address each child's specific needs and not deliver one-way delivery to all, and whoever fits in, whoever grasps it. No, we need to make sure that every single child grasps it according to his way of learning or her way of learning. So the government and the boards have worked around it. Lot of manuals have come out. You can see that the NEP manual cover is there. And at the Head Start, we also have one of the central boards who have worked with the British Council in bringing up the competency-based education project. They are working very hard in that central board to make sure that 25,000 schools come under the banner of competency-based education, including assessments, by 2024, right? We also have another one, which is the CISC manual at the bottom, where they've talked about competency-based education, but they are working out on the strategies. So the worries are not just yours in schools. The government has been worried, everybody has been worried, and they are looking at how to plug the gaps. And of course, this is what had come out last year in July, just a year and a quarter ago. And they have defined that especially for the central board schools, there will be a system of assessment called Safal. So more about Safal when we are doing assessments. So what is this buzz about? Competency-based education. Some of you may already know about it. Some of you may be actually trying to practice it or practicing it with a certain amount of success. But many of you probably don't know anything about it. So why don't we have some interactivity from you? We're going to take a quick quiz on the chat window. We would like all of you to try and put in as one word or just a short phrase what comes into your mind when we use the word competency. Right now, I'm going to watch the chat window and see what somebody's already got. Ability, skill, capability, very good. Skill again, competition, efficiency, valuation, development. Oh, lots of them. Capability, confidence, growth, learning based on a child's previous knowledge, very good. Knowledge, efficient development, capability, learning, yes, of course. Proficiency, caliber, overall development, excellence in a particular field, yes. Creativity, strength. All right, thank you very much. So basically, whatever you have written here, we are going to be covering, but we're going to fit it into the right perspective as we move along, right? So by end of today's session, this is what we're going to cover in terms of competency-based education. You'll be able to know how it is defined, what the concepts in it are. You will be able to appreciate its benefits within the curriculum system, the educational scenario. You'll be able to view aspects of the curricular change and the change in mindset that is required in order to embrace competency-based education and make it successful. And towards the end, we are also going to show you some examples of how competencies are laid out in each subject and how you can go about measuring those competencies. So when we talk about competencies, we're essentially talking a combination of 4 elements that provides a specific potential in an individual. So we're talking about 4 elements that are required to be fused in order to be able to perform a task, a critical function, or solve a problem. And here they are: knowledge, skills and abilities, attitudes and values, and behavior. So when we look at competencies, we realize that they are a combination of all of these, but these can either be acquired from outside of ourselves or they could be innate. That means we are inherently born with certain abilities and skills which are already within us, right? The third aspect is that when we develop competencies, we must be very sure about where we want to reach. So yes, competencies are defined by very specific targeted goals, which when you will see in terms of the curriculum and education, what they are called, right? They are visible and holistic because if I have knowledge about something, I'm using my skills and ability to use it. And you can see as I'm speaking to you right now, so I'm visible to you. I have a certain level of knowledge and I'm being able to talk to you about competency-based education. And sometimes it is also very, very holistic. When you look at Hardik Pandya on the cricket field, he has been coached, he has learned the skills of cricket, he has read up about what works, he is extremely well experienced and he's proficient in it, right? And he has also to work on his physical health and well-being. He needs to eat very well. So there is a holistic kind of development. In CBE, competencies are explicitly defined by learning outcomes. So in point number 3, what are those targets and goals? They are learning outcomes. I'm sure you're all familiar with the term learning objectives and learning outcomes. Whenever you think of a chapter or a topic, you always begin with that line. At the end of this topic or end of this lesson, children will be able to, and the tada, 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 tada. You've made a list of 4 to 5 things you want the children to be able to do after the chapter is over. So within those able to do pointers, we have to build this entire not only knowledge. So those points that you will list under what the children should be able to do, we should be able to build the competencies of not just hardcore conceptual knowledge. We should also be covering skills and abilities, attitudes and values, and behavior. The level of attainment of these competencies is what we have to measure. So that is called the proficiency against those competencies, and they are mapped to the learning outcomes. Say, for example, you want to have an example of, say, children should be able to write a formal letter, right? So you know that when you have a formal letter that needs to be written, there is a certain format in which the letter has to flow in terms of how you started, beginning with the date, salutation, etc., and then you end it with the person's name and signature and whatever, right? So if the child has attained the skills, if a child knows everything about how to write, then he would be absolutely proficient. But if a child has missed out a date or the subject line or the body of the text or the salutation, then you know the attainment of competency is only up to a certain level. So the degree of proficiency to how competent I am is what will define me. It will define who I am, how I can do things, what I can do, how I look at life, how I interact with others. So the first one was knowledge that we talked about. Obviously, it is with the cognitive domain. It is theoretical, conceptual buildup of facts, right? We can either read about it, we can gain it from others, we can pick it up through an experience. So the sources of knowledge can be many. We can be taught about it by a teacher in school. We can be watching a TV program. We just see something in life as we are looking out and we learn something. So knowledge can be acquired through many sources. It is a visible characteristic because once whether I'm using it as a source or I'm actually using it in my life, it is coming through in a way that I know how to use the knowledge. However, when we talk about having knowledge about something, it doesn't mean that I have the competency to use the knowledge. That means I have the skill and the ability to use the knowledge. Here's an example. For example, in physics, when we study how birds fly, which is how human beings actually learned how to fly in planes, we know how the aerodynamics work, what the physics principles are in order to make something get a flight, right? Now I know it in theory, but does that mean tomorrow you put me into an indigo flight and I can fly the plane? No. So alone, knowledge is not enough to be able to do something, right? So, excuse me. Yes. So as per NEP 2020, the knowledge must not be in subject silos. What NEP is now saying, if we have to build knowledge, let us not only look at a mathematics part of it, the language part of it, the SS or the science part of it, or the sports part of it. We have to do a cross domain, a sort of a multi-dimensional approach of covering all the subject domains related to that. Say, for example, you want to explore water as a topic. There is a numeracy and mathematical domain to it in terms of measurement. There is a science domain to it in terms of how it changes its state depending on the temperature, pressure, and so many other factors. There is a literary part of it where you can read poems about water, rain, sea, so many things. You can actually experience water and get a feel of water when you use it through your experiments or use watercolors when you're using art. So when you look at something holistically, the child is developing competencies across all the curricular and subject domains. The second one is about skill. So we talked about the cognitive. Now we are looking at the practical ability of using that knowledge in order to perform an action. So it relates to the psychomotor domain where we are using our own body parts as well as some tools, accessories, or whatever in order to do something. If I'm going from point A to point B in my car, then yes, I'm using my hands and my leg. I'm using my eyes to be able to see what's happening on the road. I know how to drive the car. I have acquired the skills of how to drive the car, and I'm going from point A to B. So I'm using something else. I'm using my body parts, and I'm using my knowledge of how to drive on an Indian road. It is a learned behavior because I can acquire it. And because I have learned it, I can also improve upon it. Today, if I've learned, say, for example, acrylic painting, I've learned the basics. As I keep doing it further, or I have some expert or a coach coaching me further on how to use acrylic paint, I can improve upon it and enhance my skills in that particular area. Naturally, because it is something which is coming out in terms of being visible, it is also measurable. So am I being able to do a wonderful job of an acrylic painting, or do I still need to, achieve some level of higher competency that is required? I may be a beginner, I may be somewhere in between, or I may be a master who has masterpieces which are out in exhibitions and sales. So the level of competency can also be improved. And again, as per NEP 2020, if we want children to use knowledge in a way in which the skills also come out, the psychomotor domains are also in practice, then we must develop curriculum which is going to allow experiences through hands-on learning, real-life application, case studies. Only then will they actually transfer the knowledge from the cognitive into the psychomotor and make it visible to the outside world. The third aspect, of course, an extension of skills is ability. When I have the knowledge, I've developed the technical skills, then I have the ability to do something. This is usually an enduring capability. You learn swimming, you learn driving, you learn how to ride a cycle. I don't think anybody will ever forget that. So most of these are enduring skills. You learn how to cook, you don't forget cooking. Yes, if you've learned a language and you don't practice it often enough, then there is a possibility you will forget some of the words and the usage of the language, and you will need to sharpen it by practicing it more. It is inherently acquired. So some of our abilities are inherently acquired. Like, for example, you look at cricketers and you say, oh, he's a born sportsman, or she's a born dancer, or he's a born orator. Because some people are just gifted differently from within them, innate skills, inherent skills. They are just blessed with that particular ability. The only thing they have to do is, how do I use my oratory talent with the knowledge and the skills of oration in order to be a very good speaker, right? And because it's innate, sometimes it's difficult to train. We have a lot of people, I have often been told, you know, Ishita ma'am, come and dance. Oh boy, I have 2 left feet. No matter how much I get trained, I definitely cannot match my steps to the others. So, Bhavna ma'am, oh, she was a born dancer. You play music, she doesn't even need to be taught. She choreographs her own steps. So that innate capability is there in some. And naturally, because it's innate, it's an invisible characteristic. It will only be visible when it comes out in the form of a performance. So here, MI plays the role. Okay, so get quick onto the chat box. Tell me, what is MI? I'm saying MI plays a big role. What is MI? Come on, participants. Let me see your responses. MI plays. Excellent. Multiple intelligences. And the first response was, oh, we have lots of them just streaming in right now. Bang on. Multiple intelligences. Thank you so much. So MI plays a role, and that is something we need to remember in the classroom. We have differently gifted children who are capable of innately doing something with a certain degree of proficiency than the others. So maybe we need to teach them and help them to show us the performance of their understanding through that intelligence. Think about it. Why do we make everybody sit and write a written test? Do we allow children to take control of their own learning and decide, all right, my understanding, I would like to show it through a drama. My understanding, I would like to show it through a painting. My understanding, I would like to show it through an experiment. Whatever the child is gifted in, if the child has absorbed and is now competent and able to do something, let us give them a chance to be able to show us how they can do it. And again, as per NEP, we must eventually internally empower our students with 21st century skills, a design thinking mindset, and a growth mindset. Human skills, equally important. Human skills about who I am in terms of a person and how I relate myself with other people in my environment. So when you look at skills and ability, you will see that the skills is the technical part, ability is what I'm blessed with, and I'm putting them together with my knowledge, which is the cognitive domain, and making me capable of doing something. The fourth one is the affective domain, the domain that covers attitudes, beliefs, and values. And these are things which are imbibed through us as little children. We see them with our parents first. We are in a household. We see how our parents are. We see how the world interacts with us. We see how people interact with us. We observe what other people do. We learn about what is good and bad and what is right and wrong. And that builds in within our value system. So the attitude, belief, and values are actually internal. And what we do with it by bringing it out into the world, say, for example, if I'm walking along the road and I see an old lady trying to cross the road, but the cars just don't stop. So I pause my vehicle, I stop my vehicle, I get out of my car, I hold my hand out to the car and I help her to cross the road. Now, behavior is external, but it is driven by what is inside me. My belief, my values, and my attitudes, which drove me to go and help that lady out. So behavior becomes external. And naturally, who we are is an inclusion. It's a fusion of our beliefs, our perceptions about things, as well as our emotions. Very, very strong part of learning as well. So it can be invisible or it could be visible. As I said, when I demonstrated the act of helping the lady across, it became visible. But when I'm looking at, at a faraway place and I'm looking at a building and I'm thinking, oh boy, I'm silently thinking to myself, I wish I owned a penthouse in that building. I'm not voicing it out. I'm just thinking about it. It's invisible. Or I'm thinking about what's happening in Ukraine is so bad. And I'm just thinking about how can we help them? That's invisible, but it's driven out of what my belief system is, right? And finally, when all this is there, how do we measure it? So we have to measure the attainment of competencies. That means the proficiency level to how far those competencies have been attained. So naturally, when we talked about learning outcomes, we have to be very clear. They have to be very clearly worded out. We have to make sure that they are measurable, all the competencies. We also have to ensure that when children acquire the competencies, it is not for that one-off exam. It has to be demonstrated in a consistent manner. So those knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behavior that the children have acquired, they have to be able to consistently demonstrate that competency level in different situations, in different aspects, being a holistic vision that they have already acquired, right? So across various settings, the same tools come into play, the same knowledge comes into play, the same behavior or demonstration of learning comes into play. And since it is acquired, it can be increased, improved, and it is visible and holistic. But how do you measure it? It's not like an exam where you just give off marks. So you have to make a rubric, and this is one example of a rubric, a proficiency scale, which is spanning missing. That means the competency or proficiency is missing in this particular child in demonstrating his learning, to completely advanced. So it actually varies from insufficient evidence of learning or an assignment not turned in or inability to perform the task. It goes all the way through to somebody who is just about getting started, has got the hang of it, but still needs intervention and support, to approaching learning, to proficient, means the minimum learning outcomes have been met. Advanced is where you've not only met the learning outcomes, but you are habitually demonstrating a sort of a mastery over it, right? This is another scale, another rubric where there is beginner, intermediate, advanced, and each of them have two levels. So even within beginners, you have an A1 and an A2, and likewise for intermediate and advanced. And this is the common European framework of reference for creating rubrics for measuring competencies. So we can actually see that competencies are nothing but learning outcomes, targeted goals, which are very explicitly and clearly outlined, which a child has to meet when the child acquires the knowledge, skills, abilities, and behavior in performing a task. The level to which the child has attained the competency is proficiency. And if a child habitually demonstrates that high level of proficiency, he's a master, right? So we see that competency is these four aspects come into it. Today's session is about foundational years and preparatory years. Now, all of this is there, but we have to focus on certain skills and abilities in the lower age groups, which are habit forming. They become the student's way of studying. It is at a metacognitive level. You know how the child will actually get into the habit of learning and acquiring knowledge and building skills. So for these particular years, we have to be very careful about focusing on another set of competencies. Let's take a look at it, because they become the foundation for all the subject and learning that comes in the higher classes.
The development of competencies for a fast-changing world can be developed together with subject knowledge. Together, they can form one integrated program by implementing a structured literacy program that develops listening and speaking, phonemic awareness and phonics, handwriting, group-guided reading and paired reading, shared reading, and writing skills.
I follow the same routine every week, and I use the same methodologies over and over. This allows me to deliver the lessons in an expert way. The structure and methodologies of my literacy program lead to the development of excellent literacy skills.
So, Literacy skills are important, but what else do we need to factor into a child's education? As we move into an uncertain future, we need our children to develop the competencies that will ensure they are creative and critical thinkers, leaders, entrepreneurial thinkers, lifelong learners, and socially responsible citizens. In this fast-paced world, understanding and developing these competencies cannot be left to chance. It has become a very important part of every teacher's responsibility to deliberately develop these skills. There's three broad categories for the competencies that we must strive to develop in our learners. The first set of competencies are skills, how we use what we know. There are 4 sets of skills that we must guide our children to develop: creativity, critical thinking, communication, and collaboration. The second set of competencies relate to character, how we behave and engage with the world. There are 6 character traits that we must aim to develop: mindfulness, curiosity, courage, resilience, ethics, and leadership. The third set of competencies relate to meta-learning, how we reflect and adapt. There are 2 kinds of meta-learning that we must aim to develop: metacognition and growth mindset. It teaches how to develop both the traditional skills required for literacy and some of the competencies required for a changing world. These 2 skill sets, literacy and competencies for a changing world, are not taught separately. They work together every day so that children develop the knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes that they need for success.
So I'm sure you'll all agree that these are skill sets that we need to develop in the foundational and preparatory years in a very, very precise manner. And we need to focus on those competencies right at this age, because if they are not addressed in these age groups, they lead to a lot of problems when the children move into the higher classes. Because without listening, speaking, reading, writing, which is literacy, we can't expect children to appreciate what they have to read, learn, understand, and communicate with the peers, with the elders, with the world in the higher classes. So the focus on these competencies become very, very crucial for these years. So a very quick recap. We have seen that competency-based education is essentially a model which needs to look at not just the knowledge, it also looks at skills and abilities, beliefs and values and attitudes, as well as behavior, in making a child look at something in a very holistic manner. It is centered on the student because it isn't just a one-way approach. We have to look at the child's independent gaps, independent way of learning, and how to help the child attain those competencies. And yes, it is focusing on the mastery of competencies, which means we have to measure to what level the child has attained that competency. And it is based on learning outcomes, which if they are ill-defined, then the whole model will fail. If they are well-defined, your children will flourish. So observable and measurable standards, which are obviously age-appropriate and class-appropriate. The children learn with independence and feel the joy of success as they attain each level of competency and show that they are consistently able to use that knowledge, skill, and attitude in every context. There is a sort of self-regulation and interest because the moment the children know where they have to reach, they know how they are getting there, they know what is their style of learning, there is a sort of responsibility that builds into the children and they become self-regulated and independent learners. And the focus on learning outcomes shifts from what the child can know to what the child can do. So it is not on learning inputs, but it is based on what the child can actually be able to perform with that knowledge. The focus on attainment of competency is to apply the knowledge and not just transfer it into an exam. The overarching mindset is a growth mindset. It is a design thinking mindset because when you put children with different contexts and different issues and problems, they become solution finders. They don't look at a problem and look at that one standard way of solving that problem. Advancement to the next level is only after attainment of the competencies of the previous level. So yes, this is a very big change. The right to education has told you, irrespective of anything, you have to promote each and every child to the next grade, right up till grade 8. Understood? That is what the law says. But as teachers, you know very well that there are children in your grades 1, say for example in grade 2, you've already taught them maybe addition, subtraction, and a little bit of multiplication, and they're moving higher up. You know there are some children who have mastered it. You know there are some children who are just not being able to do multiplication because they haven't got the understanding and the concept correct in their minds that it is a form of repeated addition. So what happens? That child gets about 40 marks out of 100 if you were to translate it into a quantitative thing. And if you want to put it into a rubric, I would put that child probably in a beginner's column or approaching column, because that child still not got the concept of multiplication. But what have I done? I have pushed the child up, where in the next grade, the teacher assumes that the child has already got that competency and takes off from that level. What we need to really address here is that child who has moved up with this learning gap. We first need to address that gap before the child moves into the higher levels of knowledge. That is where competency-based education is more important. We know this term in many other ways also. The world talks about competency-based education as mastery-based education, proficiency-based education, outcome-based education, performance-based education. So there are many names to it, but essentially whether you take mastery, proficiency, outcome, or performance, what are you doing? You are measuring the attainment of competencies against a particular standard. So when we look at competency-based education, it's actually focusing on 3 aspects: competency-based instruction, competency-based learning, which is happening with the students, and then how do you measure how much they have attained, that is competency-based assessment. So what does CBE include? Clearly defined outcomes, we talked about it. There is a flexible time frame. So when I talk to you that example of this child moving up from grade 2 to grade 3 with those gaps, we need to give the child more time than the others in order to get a particular concept. So CBE talks about a flexibility in the time frame in the process of learning. Not every child learns the same way. We have different learners. We have visual learners, auditory learners, we have kinesthetic learners, we have literary learners. So we have to think of different pedagogies that we can use in the classroom so that we are able to address each of the learner types. Yes, a variety of engaging content. There could be videos, there could be role plays, there could be a field trip that you take the children out for, in which they are taking down notes, coming back, then getting into groups, having debates and discussions, coming to a consensus. So there are a lot of different things in which we can engage the students in the learning process, which is way beyond what your textbook tells you to do. Then, of course, you have criterion reference testing. I'm going to leave Kritika ma'am to explain what is criterion reference testing versus norm reference testing, which is what we do in the traditional classroom. So Kritika ma'am will be able to give you details on that when we are doing assessments. And of course, we are also looking at the children demonstrating or giving a performance of their understanding against those learning outcomes. So finally, what happens? The advancement to the next level should ideally happen only after I have attained the competency of a lower level. So the components of CBE are these 3. So let's take a look at what is competency-based instruction, right? Not to say that competency-based instruction is a separate component, learning by the children is separate, and assessment is separate. If you see the 2-headed arrow, it is completely connected because assessment defines learning, the attainment of competency defines my instruction, the instruction again affects learning, and the learning will again affect the performance by the students. So it is completely an integrated concept. So when we look at competency-based instruction, usually we are covering all these elements. We are looking at the knowledge part, how students will participate, what is my role as a teacher, how will I assess them, and what is the role of assessment in this particular topic that I'm going to be covering. What should I be emphasizing on? Which assessment method will I use? And what is the academic culture in our school within which I'm going to make this competency-based education thrive? When I look at the traditional model against each of these elements, let's look at what the traditional model says, which is what more or less all of us are doing today in the classroom. So the knowledge is transmitted through instruction from teacher to children. Usually the children are passive except for that time when the teacher is asking, okay, you answer this question, you answer this question, you answer this question. Usually the educator, facilitator, teacher, however you want to call it, has a certain sort of a hierarchy of, in the hierarchy, there is an authority, a sort of a leading with authority. If the children say, ma'am, why can't we do something today in the class? Then the teacher immediately says, no, we can't do that today. I have to finish this lesson. Let me go ahead with my lesson. I'm sure many of you are smiling because this happens to us all the time. I know the only time when we get really, really upset is when they say, ma'am, no studies, let's go for PE. No, physical education all the time is not going to be a competency-based model, definitely. But perhaps sometimes instead of a lecture-based method, and where we are actually telling them how to do things, what to do, how to learn, what to read, maybe we can take a step back there. We are always doing an assessment of learning rather than for learning and as learning. We are helping children to learn concepts. We are helping children to learn skills only to be able to get a correct answer. Because somehow in the traditional model of education we have in India today, mistakes cannot be made. There is no room for error. We are pushing children to only be perfect. But hey, there is learning in making mistakes, because when a child makes a mistake and then learns through that mistake will never get committed again. So we have to allow room for errors and mistakes and help the child learn through the mistake, fill in the gaps of where the lacuna was, and I mean where the lacuna is, fill those gaps, and then move on ahead into higher levels of learning. It's one-dimensional, and it usually creates a culture of the children being very individualistic, where they are comparing their marks with somebody else, and so competitive, not with my previous performance, but with my neighbor, with roll number 30. How much did you get? Oh, I got only this much. How about saying, last time I got 11, this time I've got 13. Yay, that's progress, right? So what is the problem with teacher-centered approaches or the traditional approach? Let's take a look.
But most traditional time-based school systems move students through lessons and grade levels, even if they only understand 60% of the material. Year after year, this creates more and more gaps in knowledge, and real-life challenges, unique learning needs, and different levels of individual support mean some students start out behind others, making it harder for them to reach academic standards. But no two children are exactly the same. Each learner has unique strengths, interests, personality traits, and learning needs. Some may be really good at building relationships or helping others. Others may excel at math or science, or they may have a creative passion that drives them. And each may have a different set of challenges that impact their lives, both inside and outside of school. Some may not be academically, socially, or physically ready when they start kindergarten. Other students may spend after school hours taking care of siblings while their parents work second and third jobs. Some kids may struggle when taking written tests, but can easily explain the content to another student. And others may quickly understand lessons in one subject area, but may need a little extra help to fully master another. A first grader, like Mia, may come home with a good grade in math on her report card, but because the grade was based on an average, her family can't see where she may still need help. While she did really well with basic addition, her family can't see that Mia is still not able to quickly subtract numbers 0 through 10. Mia will need this skill in second grade, when she'll be expected to subtract numbers 0 through 20 automatically. By third grade, Mia will have an even greater gap to overcome, when she needs to be able to subtract 3 to 4-digit numbers, up to 1,000. In a traditional school system, where Mia can advance without completely mastering foundational skills, Mia will most likely continue to struggle with subtraction, a key skill not only for the next grade level, but for making change at her summer lemonade stand. Educators have always tried to do their best to support the needs of every child.
So we saw this is a problem, right? So when you look at those color boxes that moved in, you realize that in a particular topic, in addition, all the colored boxes fitted in. When it came to subtraction, there were those white gaps which were in the middle. And isn't it true that with a grade of B, when you tell a parent or you tell the child you've got B in math, how often do we go down to understanding what is the child really competent in that particular assessment, and which is the portion that the child didn't score well in order to get her to get B? So those are the areas that competency-based education looks at, and which is why the whole model of CBE becomes student-centered, because the student is in charge of taking the learning forward by attaining those competencies. Children are more active in the learning process. There's deeper learning, more conceptual level learning happening. And because the feedback assessment is happening through the process of learning, it isn't happening only at the end. There is evaluation, regular feedback happening, which is helping the child progress in a very smooth manner. It develops a deeper understanding, it's multidimensional, and it is more collaborative than individualistic and more supportive than competitive. The components of CBI are many. We are looking at, which in fact even some of the boards have done. The NCERT, the government has been saying, let us reduce the content that is being given in terms of topics in school education. Let us give them little, but let us make them competent in that much of knowledge that they are acquiring and the skills that they acquire. We have to use a practical and professional approach and define what are those attainments or learning outcomes which can be measured and shown that children have attained those competencies, right? We have to look at pedagogical processes. We have to see what we are doing in schools today. How can we make it different so that it is more child-centric, interdisciplinary? We have to allow for cooperative learning, group discussions, peer tutoring, blended learning, flipped class. I mean, these are all lovely, fancy words. Not just fancy words. We talk about it, how our school has flipped classroom. What exactly is it, and how can I use the strength of that to make sure that the children in my class are going to be able to have a competency-based education using these pedagogical practices? And of course, computational learning, which is through experiences, problems. How do I define a problem? What has caused the problem? What is an approach to solve the problem? What are the different solutions I can think of? Try out those solutions and then home in on one that actually works. That is the whole process of learning, right?
We can lift them to the heights that they need to ensure their success and to ensure that they can reach goals that they set for themselves, dreams that they aspire to achieve. But to do that, we understand that we have to help them develop the background knowledge, skill set, dispositions that will guarantee that dream becomes reality. And so what personalized learning does is just that. It ensures that every child receives the structures, the support, the knowledge, the intervention, and the opportunities to apply the content and the knowledge that we're providing to them in ways that are meaningful to them.
With competency education, students like Mia will be prepared for that lemonade stand to balance their own budget, succeed in college, and even run their own business someday.
Right? So we have instruction on one side. Now let's look at competency-based learning. So that was the teacher's outlook. Now look at what's happening with the children. So the moment the children have very clearly defined outcomes which are defined, they know where they have to go. It's like saying today, sometimes in families when we say, chalo, chalo, hame bahar jana hai. What is the first question your child asks you? Mummy, kahan ja rahe hain? Isn't it? So imagine in learning, if the children know where they are going with the learning process, how easy it is for them to be prepared and looking forward to it, being excited about it. So if we make the learning outcomes transparent, well communicated, and show them, I want to see how well you are going to be able to do this. So you have to show me how well you can do this. Of course, you will be able to measure it through the rubric. You will be able to show the child that in performing that particular task, The child has transferred the knowledge, skill, attitude that he has acquired into the task and shown, I've done it, I've got it, I can do it, not just I know it. So there is a transfer from know to be able to do. The learning will be guided by the specific learning outcomes for sure, and the student's ability to transfer the knowledge will happen through the application of skills. Students will refine their skills on timely differentiated support. This is very crucial to competency-based education. So we don't wait till the end of everything to measure whether the child really has acquired the competency. We keep measuring it along the way and tweaking it for the child to be able to get a sort of a feel-good factor of having succeeded, attaining something and moving on, right? And the learning is much more personalized because it is child-centric, it becomes more personalized. So how is it more personalized? Let's see.
Personalized learning system, particularly competency education, flips the traditional school model on its head and puts each student at the center. Students, parents, and educators have a shared understanding of the knowledge and skills each child is expected to learn.
We have different targets we have to reach. In our classroom, we have a big bulletin board saying what trimester we're in and what learning targets we have to complete. And once we complete them, we move on to the next, and sometimes two of them will go right into each other, so we can learn two at once.
Most of my kids know pretty much where they stand. If you ask them, what are you working on in literacy? They can say, oh, I'm doing syllables right now, or I don't need to do my letters anymore because I know them already.
In a competency-based environment, every student has a common set of clear learning targets and knows what they need to do to succeed. How they get there is personalized to their needs and interests, and they can make choices for how they demonstrate what they've learned. Every student is challenged to grow even beyond the standards, and every child succeeds.
So whenever I meet a goal, like pass writing my letters, they put it up there. So I pass sight words and a lot of stuff up there.
It's just so much fun to see the kiddos get excited about their learning. And one kiddo might be excited because they finally learned the letter M, whereas you have another kid who's excited because they wrote 3 sentences. And they can be excited at the same time in the same classroom, and that's just so neat to see because no one's waiting. But yet nobody also feels bad that they're behind.
Educators and students are empowered to understand individual interests and learning needs and work together to meet learning goals. This relationship with teachers ensures each student has a voice, and they get the support they need to fully understand and demonstrate each concept before they move on to the next, creating a stronger foundation for each level of learning. And they do more than just memorize concepts for a test. They understand why they're learning each concept and how to use it to solve problems, think critically, and work with others in real-world situations.
The second aspect of competency-based learning is that students really know. So what you saw in the movie, in a nutshell, these are the points. The students know how, why, and when to learn, how to apply the learned knowledge and demonstrate their learning or competency in that particular field. The strategies ensure equity because we saw how child-centric it is, the individualized support that is given to each and every child. It's there. And for competency-based education to actually succeed, such kind of an outlook becomes a culture in the school. It has to be embedded in the school academic and curricular culture. And students' progress and advancements based on evidence of mastery and not on the grade and seat time in a particular class. I finished 10 months in grade 2, so I move up to grade 3. Well, it's not going to help because all the gaps that I have, I'm moving up with the gaps. Then I add more gaps in the next level. Then I add even higher number of gaps in the higher levels. And then I sit with a problem and I say, I'm going to fail. I can't study. I should get out of school. But for this to have absolute success, we need to give a certain amount of autonomy, freedom, creativity, innovative freedom to the teachers. Because when I have to look at so many different kind of learners, the teacher has to have the freedom to be able to do different things with different children in the class. So let's take a look at how this works.
Educators have the autonomy, structure, and support they need to develop creative ways to meet students where they are. They can challenge students who want to move through content quickly and provide personalized supports for those who need a little extra time. Educators, students, and parents work together to continuously improve, share lessons learned, and develop new ways to achieve goals. The result? Through competency education, every student is challenged and every child succeeds.
Right? So how will CBL help students? How will competency-based learning help students? It's all there for you. It will build up their communication skills, their collaboration skills. They'll be more confident. They will learn how to express and respect diverse views of people around them. They will develop student agency. That means they will feel responsible for their own learning. It will definitely affect deeper learning because they are not learning only facts for rote memorization. They will learn how to give and take critical feedback. They will ask questions because they'll become inquirers. And of course, the level of engagement and commitment just becomes so much more, right? Now we come to assessments, and I now hand over charge to my colleague, Kritika Mansingh, who will take you from assessments till the end of this particular session. Thank you. Kritika ma'am? I think we may need to unmute her since everybody has
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm here now.
Okay.
Okay. So a very good afternoon to all of you. Without breaking the flow of what Ishita ma'am has started, I will take it on from here. So since we have already gone through the basics of competency-based instruction and learning, this is the third part and also the most central part of CBE, which is assessments. So let's begin with at the very beginning. Why do we assess? We assess to recognize, plan, monitor, or accredit learning. Now, I needn't explain this further. Recognize is when we learn what is the prior learning that the child already is coming with. Then planning helps us to develop a diagnostic plan as to where the child stands and how we take it further. Monitoring happens through our formative assessments, wherein while we are transacting the instructions, the curriculum, we understand what is the child, how is the child learning, and where do we need to streamline it further. And accrediting learning means the summative assessments that happen at the end of the session or the term, which help us give a certification, so to say, to the learning that has happened as to whether the child has passed grade so-and-so, has the child cleared the board exams or not. So that is the accrediting part of it. Now, moving further, a lot of times testing and assessment is used interchangeably. These terms are used interchangeably, but there are basic differences under various heads, if you see, between testing and assessment. When it comes to the process, testing is discrete. That is, we usually give one topic or one subtopic and we test the child on those. Those standalone things are tested. But when we talk of assessment, then it is continuous. So it happens over a period of time, say over one semester, 6 months term, or over the entire session, or over even several years as the child progresses from one grade to another. Then the span of testing is always narrow. Like I said, sometimes the topics that are being tested are standalone or they are very specific, while assessment by itself is a holistic process. When we talk of focus, testing is focused on the past. What has the child learned? And assessment is more focused on the future, as in where is the child going and how do we make that path smoother and more fruitful. As for the output, testing gives reports, it generates reports which we present to our parents. And when it comes to assessments, then assessments are more about giving a feedback which is conversational, which is helpful, which is collaborative. Then measuring, we measure memorization in testing, which is what ma'am started with in the first slide itself, that our focus has been so long, it has been on memorizing and marks produced by reproducing what we have memorized. While when we talk of assessment, we are talking of deep learning, learning which will last them throughout their lifetime. Then how do you compare? In testing, we compare students to their counterparts, to other students in their grade. We will come to this later also when we talk about norm referenced and criterion referenced testing. When we talk of assessment, then the comparison is from the past learning. Where was the child 3 months back or 3 weeks back, and where is the child now in terms of learning? So when we're talking of competencies, this assessment will tell us how competent did the child attain this competency previously, or has he attained it now? So we are talking of comparing the child's progress to his or her own learning. Feedback is extrinsic when it comes to testing. Somebody, the teacher, or has to tell the child, has to tell the parent where the child is or how the child is doing. But assessment will provide intrinsic feedback. So intrinsic feedback is here because the LOs are very clear, because we have already told the children what we are going to test them on and what are the competencies that we expect them to attain. So the children, while in the process of learning, they know where they stand. So this assessment gives intrinsic feedback. When it comes to criteria, again, external criteria, testing has external criteria, internal criteria too is present in assessment. In evidence, the artificial evidence, what is the meaning of evidence? Evidence is how do we prove that the child has learned something, that learning has occurred. So testing is artificial evidence in the sense that we create a test paper and the child attempts that, then we produce a result. So we are externally, we are artificially trying to create evidence of the child's learning. Whereas authentic evidence exists in terms of assessment. The child, because the child can demonstrate what they have learned, that skill is now present, so they are able to show it. That evidence is now authentic. So we know for sure that the child, there is no scope for cheating, for copying from somewhere. There is no scope for just memorizing, rote learning, and then reproducing it in the exam. The evidence is authentic. Now, testing is done to the learner. It is something that the learner undergoes, and rather traumatically on most occasions. But assessment happens with the learner. Then technology, when it comes to the role of technology, in testing, we have things like MCQs that we now use, especially now that in online testing, we also started with Google Forms and things like that. And in assessment, the technology used is more holistic. So it's like developing a portfolio and something where the children have evidence of what they have learned, which is tabulated, which is documented and collected over a period of time. Now, moving on to the criterion and norm referenced assessment. I'll bring out the differences here because this is central to CBE and CBA. Norm referenced assessment is what we normally carry out. Norm means, of course, what the usual thing that is being carried out in schools these days, which is wherein we give a grading. So there's a grading of poor, good, excellent. There are grades B, C, A plus. And this is it's like a bell curve. So this is on this graph, if you see, the child's performance or their grades or their percentages can be plotted anywhere on the graph. But it does not tell you anywhere what is it that the child knows and what is it that the child does not know in that 100 marks or 20 marks paper. What are the competencies that the child lacked in, and what are the competencies that the child has mastered? Wherein in criterion referenced assessment, because the competencies are well defined, because for every chapter, for every subtopic and topic, we know that the child needs to know this at the end of the term or at the end of this session, then it is binary in that manner. The child has either not yet attained the competency, or the child has attained the competency. So it is not yet competent or competent. Now in norm referenced assessment, the goal is to compare the learners amongst themselves, or the cohort, the classroom. So the class and the sections, there we have competition. Okay, who scored so many marks, who's the highest percentage, and best grades. That is how we compare learner to learner. But in criterion referenced assessment, the goal is to compare the learners to the standard. So the standard is defined, the competencies are defined, and now our task as teachers is to find out, has our learner attained that competency or not? Now, in criterion referenced assessment, that is what we are aiming to achieve through CBA. The criteria are public. Now, this means that every learner in the classroom knows what are the competencies that they are working towards and how they are going to demonstrate the attainment of those competencies. 100% of criteria must be satisfied at each level. The child must not be allowed to progress. The child must be assisted to achieve every competency before they are promoted to the next grade, before they are shifted on to a higher level of content. So level 1, if you see the levels that are given there, level 1 is not less competent than level 2. It is just a level, a competency that is defined. Say, for example, I'll take the case of, say, a social studies chapter. Now, in that social studies chapter, if in, say, a history chapter, if my competencies are, the child is, say, learning about the Delhi Sultanate, then I have to, if I have given the competencies, that the child must be able to identify what was the lineage, what was the chronological order of the dynasties that came into power in Delhi. And the child should be able to, now these are statements that define the competencies. And then the child should be able to identify what were the characteristics of the rulers of these dynasties, what was the typical styles of ruling of these rulers. So these are different competencies. So there is nothing like knowing the first thing means that the child is at a lower level, and knowing the second thing means that the child is at a higher level. Each competency is independent, yet it is interlinked, and attainment of every competency is equally important before the child can be said to have mastered that and can move on to the other topic. Now, CBA, or competency-based assessment, what is it? It is the process of collecting evidence and making judgment. So this evidence, collection of evidence is extremely important to the entire process. And this is something that all children must know how to do. So when we define the competencies, when we define the LOs, that is the time when we must also tell them how is it that they are going to demonstrate evidence, that they are going to present to the class, to the teacher, that they have actually mastered this competency. This CBA is about what information needs to be collected. Now, evidence does not mean just writing a question paper and answers on in an examination. It means being able to hold their own when they are asked to present, say, do a role play or carry out a group activity or demonstrate the actual practical aspect of that skill. So how to collect the evidence, how to demonstrate it, and how to use it in forming understandings, recommendations, or judgments. Now, recommendations or judgments means this is where the role of the teacher kicks in, that the teacher has seen the evidence of learning, and the teacher will now judge whether it is at par with what she had wanted, whether the child has achieved the competencies, the bar where the teacher had said, whether the child has crossed it, or the child has just touched it, or has fallen short of it. So now the teacher explains to the child, she sits with the child and with the parents and explains to them, where is it that the child needs support in attaining this particular competency. So we need to assess, to generate information that can be acted upon. This evidence is what we will act upon. This is what will guide our students' learning and our instruction. So to recognize, plan, and then yes, so providing feedback as well as feeding forward, which is planning for future learning. Now, how does it help us? It helps the learner and the teacher. It gives clear competencies, it defines them to the learner, and also it helps the teacher see whether I'm assessing them correctly, whether the assessment process, whether the learning outcomes that I've defined, the lesson plans that I have developed, are they in line with what I want, with the outcome that is desired. It challenges and motivates the learners because they know clearly what is it that is expected of them. Where is the bar? How are they expected to meet it? And then it also helps them get a refined feedback. Teachers are able to specifically point out what is it that the learners need to work on more and what kind of support they need. So differentiated learners, all their needs are taken care of here. Then feedback, like I said, can be intrinsic and extrinsic. This provides both kinds of feedback. And it is not just giving feedback on the student's current performance, but also it tells them about how to plan for future assignments, and it offers constructive guidance on how to do better. It reduces learner anxiety, of course. This is one thing which is of great importance to us. Every time we see this examination fever, when it grips the students, a lot of students face anxiety before the exam, and then before the results are going to be declared, they are not sure how they have fared in the exam, what are the marks that they're going to get. And before the exam, they're not sure about what is it that they're going to be tested upon. Now, because CBA defines exactly what is it that they're expected to know and demonstrate, so it greatly reduces learner anxiety. Now, what is the place of assessment in CBL? It is central. CBL is assessment driven, and assessment defines the content and processes of learning, a cyclical process towards advancement based on mastery of competency. So this is cyclical. The assessments will drive learning, and the learning is then the learning directs the assessments. We will now move on to a short movie and talk about assessment.
Assessment systems to promote critical thinking, inquiry and analysis-based learning is a key reform in the National Education Policy 2020. To advance efforts towards a competency-based education system, the structured assessment for analyzing learning called Safal for grades 3, 5 and 8. Safal is a stepping stone to enable competency-based education in all schools. Safal will measure progress through a competency-based assessment. The key features of Safal are competency-based assessment to monitor progress on core concepts such as measurement, reading comprehension, operations, application, and critical thinking. Assesses students on competencies to grades below and at their grade level. Assessment will not impact students' promotion to the next grade, and students won't have to experience exam pressure or stress. The assessment will have high-quality, competency-based questions. Reporting on absolute levels of learning will provide schools, parents, and students development feedback on critical competencies. Safal will nudge the education system towards competency-based learning, measuring the effectiveness of the school system and identifying areas of intervention at a classroom level. School reports will provide school principals and teachers with actionable steps to drive change at the classroom level. Schools can opt in for Safal in grades 3, 5 and 8. Students will be assessed on mathematics, language and science.
Okay, now the competency-based education and its learning outcomes that are given here. Okay, so now NEP 2020, we know that it is called for a shift from an assessment system that is summative. So exam-based system is soon going to be redundant. It is going to be passé, and I think it's about time that that happened. And we are more and more focus is going to be on regular and formative assessments. It has to be competency-based, like we have been talking about. It promotes such that it promotes learning development for all our students and tests higher order skills. So instead of just learning the answers, producing them in the exams, we are now shifting towards this, and NEP has really pushed this agenda. And I think this is going to benefit all students. And okay, so how now, this is a natural question that arises here. How can you leverage CBA in your own learning environments? As teachers, we are all going to wonder, how do we do this in our classroom, in our schools? We have to begin with redefining how we assess our students. We have to go beyond the textbooks. We have to push for higher order thinking skills instead of asking them questions in the paper, which are simply based on memory or things like which year did this happen, or what is the formula for this, or direct application of formula and then finding out the answer. Instead of that, something that will push the students into applying the knowledge that they have acquired, into creating something of their own. That is what we have to move towards. And we also have to encourage a lot of group work, a lot of peer work, peer assessment, and give them scope for hands-on activity and experience. Then we have to develop rubrics and make sure that learners know how to produce the required evidence. Now, this cannot be emphasized enough, that children, if they know what is it that they're going to learn and what is it that they're going to be tested upon, then the entire process becomes very simplified, very uncomplicated. It's like knowing where you're going and how you're going to get there. If you know that, you will most definitely land on the destination. Now we have to create a standards-based report card with details about not just the content, but a list of targets, goals, and expectations. And this has to be communicated to all. By all, we mean the school, the management, the principal, the section heads, the teachers, and the students, as well as their parents must know what is it that we are aiming for. Now, finally, documenting everything. So not just going for a quantitative report card, which gives the percentages or gives the grades. We have to have a process of documenting evidence and producing qualitative reports. Now, these qualitative descriptions of the extent to which learners have met the standards, they must be actively communicated, not only to the learners, but also to the other teachers who are responsible for the students. So a lot of teamwork, a lot of integration has to happen in terms of the school staff as well as with the parents. That synergy has to be created. Yes. Now, CBE, who benefits? Of course, everybody benefits. CBE is something that is going to benefit the students most of all. But of course, that is the entire idea. But when it benefits students, it's going to benefit the parents, the teachers, the school system, and the education system and the nation as a whole. Instead of simple rote memorization of concepts, the learners will question how the content that they are learning is important for them. If they know why they are learning what they're learning, then that will create more interest, more engagement with the curriculum, and more participation. They will be able to understand application of concepts in their contexts and real life. Now, this is something that we really need to work on, that we have to reduce the gaps between what the textbook says and what the child actually needs to apply in their daily life. And this gap has existed for long enough, and it's high time that we start ridding them of it. The learners will be able to explore how the same concept or idea may be extended or applied further in similar or different contexts. So this helps them develop deductive thinking. This helps them develop lateral thinking, divergent and convergent thinking. So all of this is built into that. What we try to build into our, consciously try to build into our lesson plans, that, okay, we have to target for higher order thinking skills, higher order learning skills. This is all automatically going to get covered if we are driven towards a competency-based system. Learners will be able to comprehend, compare, manipulate, and apply knowledge for real-life purposes. So it's the same thing. If you say that it may seem repetitive, but because it is central to CBE and CBA, that is why it is coming again and again. The aim, of course, is to focus on the all-round development of learners so as to prepare them for the demands of the 21st century. So the governance, the parents, community, teachers, students, everyone is going to benefit from this. As Mahatma Gandhi famously said, of course, and it is a great coincidence that tomorrow is his birth anniversary. So be the change you want to see in the world. So this is something that all of us as teachers, as educators, I think we have a great responsibility towards our students. And this change has to be brought in from us so as everybody benefits and moves ahead. We have to focus and work towards creating happy learners rather than children who are burdened with textbooks and with exams. Now, as a school, what is the level of readiness of our school? A lot of teachers present here would be wondering, and there would be a lot of school heads also and coordinators here. Now, there are 5 stages. Now, this is not something that is very cut and dry, but this is for convenience sake that even that the government and the NCERT have devised these 5 stages. That stage 1 is if you and your school, if you're trying to understand what CBE is. So the whole school and all stakeholders are still exploring the idea of CBE. You are attending webinars like this one and others I'm sure you've attended. So you're trying to find out what it is. Then you are at stage 1. Stage 2 will begin when you have understood and you're discussing and you're considering. You are actively planning to opt for it or initiating it at your school level for your students. Stage 3 is when you have known, when you know what it is about, you have decided, and you're now planning to start it. And stage 4 would be when you have partially implemented it in a few grades and for few subjects. Stage 5 is for schools, and I'm sure there won't be too many in this stage in our country as of now, wherein full implementation of CBE has happened in all grades and subjects. As of now, the NEP 2020 says the Government of India vision is to implement CBE in English, Maths, and Science in 25,000 CBSE schools by 2024. But this is something which is, even if you don't look at this timeline for CBSE schools, then you will know that CBE is something which is happening worldwide. And the sooner schools in all boards, even state boards and ICSE and like CISE and CBSE, unless all of us move towards this as a team, this goal is not going to be achieved. And let us not, even if we don't want to pay too much attention to what the government timeline is, but for the benefit of our students, this is what we should be aiming for. Now the shift from traditional to CBE, where we are and where we wish to be. This change has to happen across 8 parameters. The academic outcomes, they have to be very clearly defined for the CBE. They cannot be just passing the student from one grade to another based on their performance in, say, 2 formatives and 1 summative exam. It cannot be like that anymore. Then the pedagogy, of course, how you interact with the students, how do you transact the curriculum in the classroom, that has to undergo a drastic change. The mindset of all parties, all stakeholders involved. So this is not just restricted to the teachers or the management or the school heads. This is also about the parents, about the community as a whole. The culture of collaborative studies, of competency-based learning, this has to seep into all of us as a society. Then the support system, of course, proficiency standards. Now, support system is how do you, what is the student going to do? How does he learn? How does the student learn? What is the support that teachers, the staff, the other infrastructure that exists in the school? What all do we need to scaffold learning of the students? We need to work on that. Then setting the proficiency standards, changing the assessment system, and then advancement. So all of this, that no student moves on to the next grade or the next level till they have achieved competency in the current at the current level. This has to be taken care of. We are not talking about holding students back from promoting, from going on to the next grade, but just devoting more time, more support to children who need it. Now, planning for CBE, what is the need to revamp? Focused on 4 things. Again, learning outcomes, content, pedagogy, and assessment. The learning outcomes have to be clear and concise. We have to define the competencies. Now, the competencies are simple statements. So 5 to 7 statements that define the focus areas in each subject, in each topic. Then the content, it has to be minimum core content. We cannot let the students be caught up in a lot of text, a lot of irrelevant information, because information is now, it is available everywhere. All one needs to do is just go online and look up anything. So it is not going to be valued in that way now. Now the idea is, what are we going to do with what we know? How are we going to apply that knowledge? Now, competencies to be attained after a certain time interval in which a specific part of the curriculum has been covered. We can use textbooks, internet, any other resources. Then when it comes to pedagogy, it has to be child-centric and inclusive. When we are talking of classroom activities, we have to pick such activities which are interdisciplinary. So scholastic and co-scholastic, such as art, storytelling, sports, everything has to come in together. There are no fine compartments now. You cannot say that I cannot teach my student maths in the playground. I cannot teach my students language if they are not sitting in the classroom. No, we have to talk about more and more integration, more and more collaboration. So discussions, group projects, peer tutoring, ICT-based, then experiential, then project-based learning, case studies, simulations, portfolios, projects. There is no end to what all we can use for carrying out the CBE in our classrooms. When it comes to assessment, the criterion reference assessments that measure the attainment of LOs, they have to be brought in. Authentic assessment based on evidence collected through holistic projects. So wherever students have demonstrated evidence of learning, that has to be documented, that has to be kept for future reference and for sharing with not only the guardians, the students, but also with the future teachers, with the teachers who will be teaching the student in the next grade or at the next level. Involving multiple judgments from self, peers, tutors, etc. So feedback has to be holistic. It has to come from all quarters in order for us to have a clear picture of where our learner stands. Now, this means that while the subject content will continue to be the medium through which learners will develop various competencies, the focus will now shift to a process-based approach, where in addition to what is learned, the process through which learning happens, how the student is learning it, this is equally important. Now we move on to the foundational stage competencies. Of course, this presentation today, this session today is focused on foundational and preparatory. So this is what we are going to talk about now. The foundational literacy and numeracy as defined by the government in the NEP 2020, as defined by our Education Ministry, they have clearly defined these competencies for the first few years, the foundational stage of our students, of all students. Now, these competencies have been divided into under 3 heads. The first is health and well-being, HW. The second is that they have to be effective communicators. So this covers language. And the third is involved learners. Now, involved learners who interact with their immediate environment. Now, here our numeracy skills will come in, our environmental studies and science SST, which comes in later after grade 3. All of this is covered under this head. So these are the 3 developmental goals defined by the NEP in the FLN mission document. Now, there is going to be key stage assessment at grade 3, 5, and class 8, of course, which we already covered in the previous presentation. Now, this key stage assessment will check the attainment of these proficiencies in grade 3 and grade 5. Now, grade 3 is said to be the inflection point. If by grade 3, a child does not know how to read, does not know how to carry out basic maths operations, that child will not be able to proceed without a lot of learning gaps to grade 4 or 5. And those learning gaps, like we saw in the movie, in the short movie, as shown by Ishita ma'am, they will go on increasing and finally compromise the learning to such an extent that the child, having gone to school for so many years, will still not be competent enough to carry out the age-appropriate tasks. Okay, now the 3 developmental goals, I'll just quickly go through these. The children maintain good health and well-being. Now, this is the first goal that we have. And under each goal, there are several competencies that have been laid out. Now, the key skills or concepts, there are 18 competencies at each level. Each level means the foundational stage has been divided into 3 years of preschooling. So there's PS1, preschool 2, preschool 3, and then followed by you have the class 1 and 2. Now, 3 years of preschool and 2 years of grade 1 and 2. What are the competencies that the child should have? Awareness of self, development of positive self-concept, self-regulation, decision-making, problem-solving, pro-social behavior, healthy habits, hygiene, sanitation, body awareness, gross motor skills, fine motor skills, hand-eye coordination, participation in individual and team games and sports. Now, if you see, these are basic things that children are expected to know by, say, age 5 or age 6, but they weren't really written down anywhere till now. But the FLN document, it has laid out all these competencies so that we can be sure that every learner has attained these. before they reach grade 3. Now, moving on to the next developmental goal, which is children become effective communicators. Now, here we are talking of the language, and not just L1, which is their first language, but also the second language, because that is also now going to be introduced once the children are in school in grade 2 and 3. So talking and listening, then reading with comprehension and writing with purpose. I'm not going into the details of this. I'm sure most of us already know, being primary teachers, being junior teachers, most teachers are expected to teach all subjects. We have a mother teacher system. So we have all been through this. We know that what is the language progression, the LSRW, and that is what now the competency level for language 1, there are 9 competencies defined at each level and 15 for the second language. I will just move to the next slide. Children become involved learners and connect with their immediate environment. Now, this IL is the skill, the competencies, which now cover sensory development, concept formation, cognitive skills like observation, identification, matching, classification, which are all mathematical skills. So now we are talking of the numeracy. And we are also talking about EVS, which is the environment awareness. Now, natural, they have to have awareness about their nature, their surroundings, physical things like water, air, season, sun. What is the social awareness in terms of myself, family? How do I relate to things around me, to the world around me? Then concept formation, number sense, number operations. So the basic operations of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, measurement, shapes. So special understanding and data handling, pattern, calendar activity, use of technology. These are basic competencies that have been defined up to class 3. Now, who else is following CBE and Gandhiji's advice? The textbooks that we refer to, these textbooks now, the publishers are also, they're keeping abreast with what the developments are. They know that we are all headed towards a competency-based system. So every textbook now comes, if you see, they come with key features defined. So things which build knowledge, which build skill, abilities, and behavior, they are all well laid out in our textbooks. So as the sample shows, if you open a textbook and you go through the first few pages, which are meant for the teacher's reference, you will easily find how to define your LOs and how to follow the progression of the book. Now, for example, this is like writing an example of CBE strategies. Now, writing a letter. The book itself, it shows what are the learning outcomes that the child should be able to write formal letters, or personal diary, or list, or email, or SMS, emails, notice, report, short personal or biographical experiences in order to demonstrate knowledge. Again, demonstration of evidence of the features of the various type of writing. Now, this is already given here. What are the life skills and values? So skills, values, attitudes, and behavior, and of course the knowledge part, it is all given here. So any textbook, if you pick it up, now dictionary skills, what is it that the child is expected? Now, because you're using a graded textbook, when we use a graded textbook, we know that this textbook will cover all the skills, all the knowledge that the child is expected to acquire by this level. Now, if you look at the learning outcomes again, it said dictionary skills, and the dictionary skills are given at the end of the chapter for them to practice. I will now take you quickly, I'll take you through the example of competency statements, say in grade 4 maths. We've just picked up a few samples of subjects and grades randomly, just so we are able to summarily cover all the subjects and all grades for all of you. Now, the learner should be able to explain or demonstrate what multiplication and division are, unless the child understands that it is not just a symbol, but what is the meaning of that symbol, how to apply that symbol, and how to carry out that operation. Then competency has not been attained. The child should be able to recite the times table up to 12 and multiply numbers by 10, use addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division to solve word problems involving more than one step. The child should be able to explain the concept of area and how it relates to multiplication, identify fractions as numbers that can be placed on a number line, compare two fractions, like knowing that 2 by 3 is bigger than 3 by 5. An example of a pizza is given here, a teacher has created a very interesting TLM of a pizza. and to explain fractions to the students. Express whole numbers as fractions and recognize fractions that are whole numbers, like knowing that 8 by 2 is the same as the number 4. Then measure weights and volumes, read charts and graphs, and show data as a graph or chart. Now, if you see, these competency statements are all demonstratable. The child will be able to demonstrate these skills. If I ask the child to measure something using a measuring scale or weights, the child will be able to demonstrate that. So we know for sure that he understands the concept of weight and how to measure it. Now moving on to say, yes, now the Frayer model. Now this is an example. Frayer model is it's a graphic organizer. Now this graphic organizer is used to help students acquire new vocabulary. It helps children process the word that they have picked up, the new concept that they have picked up, and translate it into their own words and to apply it to their own situation in their own context. So the Frayer model, it says word or concept, whatever new thing that they have learned, say they've learned about a triangle. So first box, they write the definition. This is just an example of how to carry out CB in class. So in the first box, they write the definition. A triangle is a polygon with 3 straight sides and 3 angles. In the second one, they have to use it in a sentence, or they have to frame their own word problem. So either they use it as a word problem, or they put it as a figure and they describe it in their own words. So you can make a triangle by folding a square piece of paper in half by opposite corners. This is what some student has come up with. In the third box, we can draw a picture or give an example of a triangle. Now here the child has drawn pictures of triangles. What they could also have done is say given examples that a sandwich is cut like a triangle, or a set square. So they could have drawn pictures of those or written those names. Then finally, the child is expected to describe a triangle in their own words. A triangle is when you connect 3 straight lines to make a closed shape. Now, this is just a simple example of a graphic organizer, the Frayer model, so that the child demonstrates what they have learned or what they have understood, and for the teacher to be sure that they have got the concept of a triangle, and she can move on to explaining the properties of a triangle or calculating the area and perimeter of the triangle. Okay, now moving on to grade 5. Now grade 5 science. After grade 3, of course, most schools divide it into social studies and science, social science and science. Now an example is that the learner, this is at the grade 5 level, should be able to explain the use of technology and the process of accessing basic needs in our daily life. Now, what we are doing here is that the child is not just learning about food and water and everything. They are also talking about how important it is in their daily life, where do they get it from, how to ensure that they are drinking clean water, or what is the importance of controlling air pollution or water pollution. So things like that. It is all relatable to their real life. Describe the interdependence among animals, plants, and humans. Guess. Now, these are skills. These verbs that are given here, if I'm sure all of us are familiar with the Bloom's taxonomy and how to relate it to our lesson plans and our learning outcomes. So these verbs, describe, explain, guess, estimate, these are the verbs that will define our classroom teaching or the activities that we are choosing, so that the students are able to demonstrate what they have learned. So recording observations, creating posters, voicing their opinion on issues. These statements will now drive the way the competency is to be attained. Now, what the success of CBE rides on, of course, it's not enough to just implement a program or implement a methodology, a pedagogy, or a system in the classroom. How do we see that the success of that system, that CBE, will be achieved? Now, teachers' awareness, understanding, and having competency in depth of subject and content. So as teachers who are responsible for young learners, for learners who are coming into the formal system of education for the first time, it is very important for all of us to understand ECCE. What are the needs of the child? What are the psychological aspects? What are the growth milestones in the early years? and to always be aware and to always look out. This is also the time which is very important. Not just the attainment of competencies is where our focus must be, but we must also be on the lookout for any problem areas. A lot of times, certain learning disorders or certain learning deficiencies that the child may have, they go unnoticed. And then in later years, the parents, they get baffled because the child is not able to learn. So things like maybe dysgraphia or dyslexia, these are things which the parents, they don't understand what is happening with the child because no teacher really pointed it out to them in the early years. So as teachers handling young learners, this is very important that we understand all of this, the pedagogical theories and practices. What is it that the child is expected to do? Yeah. So this, we must always keep a keen eye on the learner. Yes, ma'am, please.
First, I thought that teaching literacy and competencies sounded like a lot of extra work. But actually, I soon realized that these competencies are embedded in the language lesson plans. I know that I am now teaching my learners literacy skills and preparing them for the future at the same time.
Okay, so moving on. Lesson planning and assessment. Is it going to be burdensome? Let's see. Now, this is the first question that comes to mind, that we're already doing so much. Young children require a lot of energy, a lot of involvement and engagement. How do I do this without making it into an additional burden or an additional responsibility with a lot of documentation, a lot of written work and keeping records and everything? So identify and map the topic-wise LOs, targeted competencies, should be mapped to the learning outcomes. Design learning to push from lower order thinking and learning skills to higher order ones. Then define explicit goals and expectations. Now, well communicated to students, parents, and schools. The goals and how those goals will be assessed, how those competencies will be demonstrated. This must be communicated to all stakeholders. Varied opportunities for cross-curricular activity and cross-curricular instructions and activity-based learning and real life and case studies. A lot of this has to be built into the lesson plans. Varied assessment strategies, so formatives and summatives. Of course, summatives happen after a fixed period of time, but a lot of formatives built into the day-to-day curriculum. Then well-defined rubrics for qualitative and quantitative progress and advancement. Timely and positive constructive feedback. Timely and positive. It is when you are observing the child making a mistake, pointing it out to them gently and making them understand how not to repeat it and making them practice it again, but not waiting for them to finish, to perform in the exam and then telling them that, okay, you didn't do this right, is not really going to help them. So observing them while they are at a task, while they are involved, and pointing it out to them at that time without stopping them from what they're doing. Now, this is a well-practiced skill, but I'm sure most teachers develop that finesse, wherein we are gently able to guide the learner towards the right path. Peer review and self-review, students' agency. Of course, students' agency is something that we go for. We saw in that short video where the little ones, that little girl, she was so excited that whatever she had learned was displayed on the bulletin board in the class for all to see. And not only her, for all learners in the classroom. When that happens, then students feel that, okay, the responsibility for my learning lies with me. So we are building agency. And when we are building agency, then we are building learners who are self-motivated, self-driven, and who are independent in the long run. Advancement only happens after attainment of competencies, so that there are no wide learning gaps in between the building blocks of learning. Now, CPD, yes, of course, this is something that NEP has again emphasized, that 50 hours of teacher training and school heads training is mandatory, which will help in self-growth, which will help in keeping the teachers abreast with whatever is happening, which will equip them with skills to practice in their classroom and to make the work easier for them. So then training and research, and of course, these exchanges between the teachers, a lot of teamwork, a lot of collaborative work. That is what we need in order for CBE to penetrate deep into the system. Of course, we have to keep in mind that it is a school level commitment. It is not something that one teacher can carry out in the classroom. She may want to, and I understand that a lot of times we are so motivated that we want to do something at our own level rather than involve everybody, thinking that it will, put it on hold, or it will require a lot of planning and a lot of ideas to come in. But this has to happen from the school level. So it has to be in order for the results to be measured, the competencies must be defined in advance by school leadership. Don't try to do this alone. Get the input of the whole teaching staff. The more people that are on board with this, the more colleagues that are interested in this and who want to implement this, who want to carry this out in their classroom, the easier it will be for all of you. Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, of course, all of us respect him so much as an educationist. His ideas have driven so many students and motivated so many teachers. Educationists should build the capacities of students in the spirit of inquiry, creativity, entrepreneurial, and moral leadership by becoming their role model. And children, the small ones, they really look up to the teachers. For them, what the teachers say is God's word. They will fight their parents, they will fight the world. Okay, now moving on to the CISC has, I'm just going to share some handy resources with you, which we have compiled. Now, this is the curriculum handbook for CISC for primary level, classes 1 to 5. And if you see in this handbook, if you access this, then there are, for every class, this is just a demonstration. This is just a sample of 2 pages that we have put up here, wherein the themes for the human body have been defined. So if you see, for every subject, right from grade 1 up to grade 5, this handbook has the themes for all topics. And they have also talked about how to integrate that with other subjects so that cross-curricular learning is happening, and how to transact that in the classroom. So all of this, the learning outcomes that are defined here can be used by teachers to define their competencies, to write down the competency statement, display them in the classroom, communicate to the students, and move on with the activities that will help them attain those competencies. Now, since the government is pushing the agenda of CBE, they are also working, they're really working hard to create resources which will help teachers and school heads. Now, Diksha is one such site, which is the digital infrastructure for knowledge sharing that they have created. Now, if you visit the Diksha, it also has an app support, so you can access it from your phone. There are various courses that are available here. And if you just visit the homepage of Diksha, then you go into NCERT, you explore that. If you can see at the bottom of your screen, the page that is displayed. If you go into that, then grade-wise, board-wise, they have defined all the competencies. They've uploaded a lot of material. You can see a lot of worksheets. You can find short videos that you can use for the attainment of those competencies. You even have question papers that are built on the CBA method. So this is a resource which is an open source developed by a government. Anybody is free to access it. And if you need any help, you can download the app or you can use the website to access this. Okay, that brings us to the end of this session. Thank you and good luck. This is, of course, now I'm throwing the floor open for questions and answers. And Ishita ma'am, if you're here, you can join me now. Or if you'd like to add something on to what we have discussed.
Yeah, okay. So can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So thank you, Kritika ma'am. You have actually wrapped it up by covering assessments and giving us such an in-depth, understanding of how it is to be done in the competency-based model. And we have also seen where are the guidelines and tips that teachers can now kind of fall back on and access in order to try and understand it better and maybe talk about it in their schools and bring in begin to think about bringing in competency-based education. So that's wonderful. So if any of you have any questions, would you like to put it in the chat window? Then we can take it up. Any specific questions which are related to competency-based education? We have very little time. I'm sure Neelam ma'am is waiting to kind of, start the countdown. So if there is any specific question, then we'll be happy to take it up. Otherwise, please take our email ID. It's given on the slide. You can write to us and we'll be very happy to get back to you with a reply to specifically what you are asking us. So Bhavna ma'am, if there are no questions, I invite you to please give a vote of thanks on behalf of QuedRack.
Thank you so much, Kritika ma'am and Ishita ma'am. It has been a wonderful and enriching session, I'm sure, for all of us here. And I think on this happy note of Dussehra and Gandhi Jayanti, we can just say goodbye and all the best to all the teachers. And I'm sure whatever tips that you have taken from the session today, you would be able to implement it in your classrooms and make learning ever so joyful. So over to you, Neelam ma'am. We're very grateful to you and Kedia sir and the entire unaided school forum for giving us this wonderful opportunity to cover this beautiful topics, competency-based education over 2 Saturdays for all the stakeholders here.
Oh, that's really nice. Just simple, thank you. That's all I can say. The previous session has got some wonderful feedback. In fact, we got a lot of appreciation coming in from the principals group, and they highly recommended that the primary teachers also join in. So I think, as they say, well begun is half done. So yeah, so on that note, we look forward to your next session, hopefully very soon. And thank you very much. Apologies on behalf of sir once again. He's unable to come in. So on his behalf, I'll again say thank you to the whole team.
Thank
We're
you.
highly grateful, highly grateful. Thank you very much. So all teachers, goodbye. All the best. Happy Dussehra and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.